The story of Keanu Reeves does not begin in the glittering streets of Hollywood, nor in the spotlight of a red carpet. It begins in Beirut, Lebanon, on September 2, 1964, with the cry of a newborn child whose future would be marked by both unimaginable sorrow and extraordinary resilience. His parents, Patricia Taylor, a costume designer from England, and Samuel Nowlin Reeves Jr., a geologist of Hawaiian, Chinese, English, and Portuguese descent, welcomed a son they named Keanu Charles Reeves. The name Keanu, derived from the Hawaiian phrase Keanu'u, meant cool breeze over the mountains. It was a poetic name, though the life that lay ahead would rarely feel cool or breezy. From the beginning, Keanu's world was unstable. His father, charming but troubled, battled addictions that pulled him further and further away from the family. When Keanu was just 3 years old, Samuel walked out, leaving Patricia to raise him and his younger sister, Kim, largely on her own. The absence of a father would become a silent shadow in Keanu's life, one that followed him into adulthood. Later, in rare interviews, he admitted that he hardly knew the man. Samuel drifted in and out of prison on drug charges, and any attempts at reconciliation never lasted. For young Keanu, it was not the sharp pain of losing someone suddenly, but the dull ache of never having truly had him at all. Patricia, determined to provide, worked tirelessly. Her career as a costume designer took her from job to job, city to city, dragging her children along on a restless odyssey. By the time Keanu was a teenager, he had lived in Australia, New York, and finally Canada, where the family settled in Toronto. Each move was a disruption. New schools, new friends, new beginnings. But Keanu was not the kind of child who complained. He observed, adapted, and learned to find solitude in himself. School, however, was never easy. Keanu struggled with dyslexia, which made reading and academics a constant uphill climb. Teachers sometimes mistook his quietness for laziness or defiance, but in truth, he was waging a private war with words that swam on the page. His marks suffered, and so did his self-confidence. Yet there was something about him that set him apart. A quiet charisma, a thoughtful presence, and a love for storytelling. While books were difficult, stories themselves captivated him. Movies, plays, and comic books became his refuge, places where characters spoke in a language that went beyond words. Sports became another outlet. On the ice, Keanu was a natural goalie, fast, agile, and fearless. In Toronto's youth hockey leagues, he earned the nickname The Wall, blocking shots with an intensity that mirrored his determination to stand against life's hardships. For a time, it seemed possible that he might chase a career in professional hockey. But fate had other plans, and the dream would eventually fade, making way for another calling. The household was never free from turmoil. Patricia, though loving, was stretched thin. She remarried more than once, and each stepfather brought his own complexities. Some relationships ended quickly, others lingered in unhappiness, and Keanu and Kim often found themselves navigating a shifting landscape of parental figures. In all of this, the siblings clung to each other. Kim would later recall that her brother had always been protective, always willing to make her laugh even in the darkest moments. Despite the chaos at home, the world outside began to open small doors for Keanu. In high school, he discovered the theater. Acting, strangely enough, did not demand perfection in reading or memorization. It demanded presence, emotion, and authenticity. On stage, Keanu felt free. He could inhabit another life, shed his insecurities, and communicate with audiences in a way that transcended text. Teachers noticed, friends noticed, and most importantly, Keanu himself felt the spark of purpose. Still, the path ahead was anything but clear. He bounced between 4 different high schools, expelled from at least one, and never formally graduated. Formal education seemed ill-suited for him, but life itself was teaching him resilience, adaptability, and empathy, qualities that would one day define not only his career, but also his humanity. One of the most painful lessons came in the form of loss. Though his father had long been absent, Keanu still held on to fragments of connection. An occasional letter, a brief visit, a fragile hope that maybe one day things would be different. But as Samuel's troubles deepened, so did the distance. The boy who bore his father's name grew into a teenager with little more than a memory of the man. It was abandonment without closure, a wound that never fully healed. Perhaps this early fracture gave Keanu the depth of sadness in his eyes, the quality that would later allow audiences to see both strength and vulnerability in his performances. By the time Keanu reached his late teens, Toronto had become both a prison and a springboard. He was restless, eager to find where he truly belonged. He worked odd jobs, managing an ice rink, sharpening skates, while performing in local theater productions and small TV roles. Each opportunity, no matter how minor, was a step toward something larger, but he could not yet see the scale of the journey ahead. In those early years, one thing became clear. Keanu Reeves was not destined for an ordinary life. He had endured enough instability, enough hardship, and enough wandering to prepare him for the unpredictable road of an actor. The boy who once struggled to read lines in class would soon be memorizing scripts seen by millions. The goalie known as the Wall would become a man who absorbed the blows of life with stoic grace, and though he could not yet know it, the cool breeze over the mountains was only beginning to rise. In Toronto, the city that became both his home and his crucible, Keanu Reeves began to search for himself in earnest. He was tall, lean, and carried a quiet energy, never loud, never the center of attention, yet always noticed. His dark eyes held a depth that drew people in, as though he were always half in the present and half elsewhere, pondering something unseen. Though academics had failed him, performance had become his refuge. Local theater productions gave him an outlet, and when he stepped into a role, he felt something ignite. On stage, the words were not obstacles but instruments. They weren't just letters on a page. They were emotion, rhythm, and life. Acting became a language in which Keanu, once clumsy with reading, was suddenly fluent. Toronto in the 1970s and early 80s had a modest but vibrant arts scene. Small theaters and television stations often needed young talent, and Keanu, armed with determination, began to find opportunities. His first professional gigs were not glamorous. Commercials, local theater, and a role in a Coca-Cola advertisement where he portrayed a young cyclist, sweat dripping as he crossed the finish line. The director praised him for his intensity. Keanu, ever committed, had pedaled for hours to look authentically exhausted. It was a small part, but it carried a lesson that would become a lifelong principle. Give everything, no matter how small the stage. Still, making a career in acting required more than passion. It required persistence in a world that dismissed dreamers. Patricia, though supportive, could only offer so much guidance. Keanu's life outside the theater was still full of instability. Stepdads came and went, and money was often tight. Yet he pressed on, working odd jobs, sharpening skates at the local rink, sweeping floors, doing anything that kept him afloat. At 19, restless and unanchored, Keanu made a decision. He would leave Toronto for Los Angeles, the heart of the film world, but before that leap, he had to carve a path. His first break came in Canadian television, where he landed roles in series like Hangin' In and Going Great. The pay was meager, the recognition minimal, but he was learning how to stand before cameras, how to take direction, how to survive rejection. His friends noticed his unusual drive. While many young men his age were content to party or drift aimlessly, Keanu was focused. Yet he was never arrogant. He listened more than he spoke, laughed easily, and carried himself with humility that made people root for him. Behind the scenes, he was also haunted by self-doubt. Was he good enough? Was this dream realistic? But doubt did not paralyze him. It only pushed him to work harder. One of the defining friendships of this period was with a fellow actor named Josh Richman. Josh believed in Keanu's potential and encouraged him to come to Hollywood. The two young men would later make the trip together, driving across the border in a battered old Volvo, chasing a dream with little more than hope and a few $100s in their pockets. Before that journey, Keanu began to gather experience in feature films. His first significant role was in Youngblood, 1986, a hockey drama starring Rob Lowe and Patrick Swayze. Keanu fittingly played a goalie. Though it was a small part, it placed him in the orbit of established Hollywood figures. Watching Swayze's effortless confidence and Lowe's star presence, Keanu studied silently, absorbing everything. He was the kind of student who learned by observation, who watched how others moved, spoke, and carried themselves, then tried to find his own rhythm. Los Angeles was both intimidating and intoxicating when he finally arrived. The city sprawled endlessly, filled with palm trees, neon signs, and a sense of possibility. But it was also unforgiving. Thousands of dreamers arrived each year, only to vanish into obscurity. Keanu knew the odds, but he did not let fear stop him. He began auditioning relentlessly, sometimes driving for hours to read for a few minutes in front of casting directors who barely looked up. Rejection piled high, but each no became fuel. His break came with River's Edge, 1986, an indie drama that shocked audiences with its raw, unsettling story about disaffected youth. Keanu played Matt, a teenager struggling with morality after a friend commits a horrific crime. The film was dark, heavy, and unglamorous, yet Keanu's performance stood out. Critics noticed the authenticity in his eyes, the way he seemed to carry real conflict beneath his skin. For the first time, he was not just a face on the screen. He was an actor with presence. From there, the momentum built slowly. In 1989, a quirky comedy would push him into the mainstream. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure introduced the world to Ted Theodore Logan, the goofy, lovable half of a pair of teenage slackers who travel through time in a phone booth. It was a strange, almost absurd premise, yet Keanu leaned into it with total sincerity. He made Ted both ridiculous and endearing, embodying a wide-eyed innocence that audiences adored. Suddenly, Keanu Reeves was no longer an unknown. He was a star on the rise. What few people realized then was that behind the cheerful, "Whoa, dude," of Ted, there was a young man shaped by hardship. Keanu never mocked his roles, never phoned them in. He respected the material, however lighthearted, because he knew what it meant to have nothing. He knew what it was to fight for each chance. But the life of an actor is unpredictable, and early success does not guarantee stability. Hollywood was full of stories of young stars who flamed out as quickly as they had risen. Keanu was aware of this, and while others chased fame, he remained focused on craft. He sought roles that challenged him, dramas, thrillers, romances, testing himself, searching for truth in every character. As the 1980s drew to a close, Keanu Reeves had transitioned from a struggling teenager in Toronto to a rising actor in Hollywood. He was still learning, still evolving, but the foundation had been laid. His journey toward art had begun, not with grand ambition, but with survival, resilience, and the simple desire to tell stories. The young man once nicknamed The Wall, on the hockey rink, was now standing at the edge of a different arena. Ahead of him lay opportunities beyond imagination, but also trials that would test the very core of who he was. And though he could not yet know it, the next decade would bring him fame, fortune, and heartbreak in equal measure. The early 1990s were a crucible for Keanu Reeves. He was no longer the wide-eyed newcomer, nor yet the commanding star he would one day become. Instead, he was caught in the in-between space, auditioning, experimenting, and trying to prove that he could do more than play the goofy charm of Ted Logan. Hollywood, for all its glitter, had a cruel habit of typecasting. To many, Keanu was the surfer dude, the eternal teenager with a lazy drawl and a clueless grin. It was an image that threatened to trap him, as it had trapped countless actors before. But Keanu resisted. He sought roles that would expand his range, that would reveal the seriousness beneath the surface. One of his early triumphs came with Parenthood, 1989, a family comedy directed by Ron Howard. Keanu played Todd, a well-meaning but dim boyfriend. The role was small, but his sincerity made it memorable. Audiences laughed with him, not at him, and critics began to sense that there was more to this young man than the caricature of a stoner. Then came My Own Private Idaho, 1991, a film that changed everything. Directed by Gus Van Sant, the indie drama told the story of two hustlers, River Phoenix as the vulnerable, narcoleptic Mike, and Keanu as Scott, the rebellious son of privilege. The movie was raw, poetic, and devastating. Keanu's decision to take the role surprised many. He was offered far safer, more commercial projects, but he chose instead to dive into a complex, challenging story about identity, love, and abandonment. The performance was transformative. Keanu brought a quiet strength to Scott, a character caught between friendship and duty, freedom and family. But it was more than just acting. Off-screen, Keanu and River Phoenix became close friends, almost like brothers. They shared cigarettes, music, and long conversations about life and art. Keanu admired River's intensity, his fearless approach to roles. River, in turn, saw in Keanu a gentleness and loyalty rare in Hollywood. Their bond would become one of the most meaningful relationships of Keanu's life, and one of the most painful losses he would endure. As the early 90s unfolded, Keanu continued to explore different genres. He appeared in Point Break, 1991, directed by Kathryn Bigelow, opposite Patrick Swayze. The film, a crime thriller about an FBI agent infiltrating a gang of surfers, became a cult classic. Keanu's role as Johnny Utah was both physical and emotional, demanding stunt work, surfing, and gunfights. The film cemented his reputation as a leading man capable of action, though critics still debated whether he had the chops for serious drama. Yet it was undeniable. Audiences liked him. There was something in his presence, an authenticity, an honesty, that resonated, even when dialogue or delivery faltered. Keanu Reeves was not a conventional Hollywood star, but perhaps that was his strength. He was not polished, not manufactured. He was real. Then, in 1994, came the movie that would change the trajectory of his career forever. Speed. Directed by Jean Debon, the high-octane thriller told the story of a Los Angeles bus rigged with explosives, set to detonate if its speed dropped below 50 miles per hour. Keanu played Jack Traven, a determined young SWAT officer racing against time. It was a role that demanded charisma, physicality, and intensity, all things Keanu carried naturally. At first, studio executives were hesitant. Keanu was not the obvious choice for an action hero. He lacked the muscular bravado of Arnold Schwarzenegger or the polished charm of Tom Cruise. But Debon saw something different, a grounded, everyman quality that could make audiences root for him. To prepare, Keanu cut his hair short, trained with the LAPD SWAT team, and performed many of his own stunts. He approached the role with his trademark commitment, throwing himself into the physical demands of the film. Whether leaping onto moving vehicles or wrestling with bomb wires, he was all in. The chemistry with co-star Sandra Bullock was electric. She played Annie, the passenger who unexpectedly becomes Jack's partner in saving lives. Their connection felt natural, unforced, and audiences loved it. The tension of the story combined with their bond turned Speed into a cultural phenomenon. The film was a runaway success, grossing over $350 million worldwide. Suddenly, Keanu Reeves was not just a quirky indie actor or a cult favorite. He was a bona fide action star. Magazines splashed his face across covers, and directors lined up to offer him blockbuster roles. Hollywood had discovered a new leading man. Yet even in the glow of success, Keanu remained himself. He was polite, humble, and almost bewildered by the fame. While other actors might have basked in the spotlight, Keanu retreated, avoiding Hollywood parties and preferring quiet nights with friends or solo motorcycle rides through the city. He donated portions of his paycheck to crew members, tipped waiters generously, and treated everyone on set with respect. Behind the scenes of Speed, crew members recalled how he would carry heavy equipment alongside them, insisting they were all part of the same team. But success also brought difficult choices. When offered a massive payday to star in Speed 2, Cruise Control, Keanu famously turned it down. The script, he felt, was uninspired. Instead, he chose to tour with his band, Dogstar, and pursue more unconventional projects. Hollywood executives were baffled. Why would a young star at the height of fame refuse guaranteed success? But Keanu was never interested in chasing formulas. For him, acting was about exploration, not cash. As the 1990s progressed, Keanu continued to bounce between genres. He starred in A Walk in the Clouds, 1995, a romantic drama that showcased his softer side, and Chain Reaction, 1996, a science fiction thriller. The results were mixed, but one thing was clear. Keanu was not afraid to take risks. He did not cling to his image as an action hero. He wanted more. Behind the fame, however, storms were gathering. The loss of his dear friend River Phoenix in 1993 cast a long shadow over his life. River's sudden death outside the Viper Room was a wound Keanu carried quietly, rarely speaking about it but never forgetting. It was a reminder of how fragile life could be, how quickly it could all vanish. Still, his star continued to rise, and just as the decade neared its end, a new role was waiting, one that would elevate him from Hollywood stardom to cultural icon. The role was Neo. The film was The Matrix. By the late 1990s, Keanu Reeves had already carved out a reputation as one of Hollywood's most unconventional stars. He had proven himself in comedies, dramas, and action films, yet critics still debated whether he was truly capable of carrying a franchise. What few knew then was that he was about to step into a role that would not only define his career, but also reshape modern cinema. The Wachowski siblings, Lana and Lily, were young, ambitious filmmakers with a vision unlike anything Hollywood had seen. Their script for The Matrix was a dense, mind-bending blend of philosophy, cyberpunk aesthetics, and groundbreaking action. At its core was a question as old as humanity: what is real? The protagonist, a hacker named Neo, would become the audience's guide through this maze of illusion and truth. Casting Neo was no simple task. Studio executives initially pursued A-list stars: Will Smith, Brad Pitt, even Nicolas Cage. Many turned it down, unsure about the confusing script or the risk of such an experimental project. But when Keanu Reeves read the screenplay, he was captivated. The ideas resonated with him: the search for truth, the battle between illusion and reality, the journey of a reluctant hero. Keanu, who had always lived between worlds, Canada and America, fame and humility, sorrow and hope, saw himself in Neo. He didn't hesitate. He said yes. From the beginning, Keanu immersed himself in the preparation. The Wachowskis demanded more than just acting. They envisioned action sequences that blurred the line between martial arts and cinema. Keanu, already known for his dedication, trained for 4 months in intense kung fu and wire work under master choreographer Yuen Wu-Ping. He practiced hours each day, perfecting kicks, punches, and stances until his body ached. Even after sustaining a neck injury that required surgery, he refused to back down. With a neck brace, he continued training, determined to honor the vision of the filmmakers. The Wachowskis were impressed not only by his discipline, but by his humility. Keanu never complained, never acted like a star. He studied philosophy, diving into books about reality, illusion, and human consciousness, hoping to bring depth to Neo beyond the action. For him, this was not just another blockbuster. It was a story with meaning. When The Matrix premiered in 1999, it was nothing short of revolutionary. The film stunned audiences with its visual innovations: bullet time, wire-fu combat, and sleek black leather aesthetics. But beyond the spectacle, it struck a chord on a deeper level. People walked out of theaters questioning reality itself. What if we are living in a simulation? Became a cultural question, echoed across late-night discussions, college dorm rooms, and coffee shops. At the center of it all was Keanu Reeves as Neo, the unlikely hero who evolves from a confused computer programmer into the One. His understated performance, often criticized in earlier roles, suddenly became his greatest strength. Neo wasn't a swaggering, overconfident savior. He was vulnerable, hesitant, human, and when he finally believed in himself, audiences believed with him. The film grossed over $460 million worldwide and won 4 Academy Awards. It became not just a movie, but a cultural phenomenon, influencing fashion, technology, and even philosophy classes. Suddenly, Keanu Reeves was no longer the surfer dude or the quirky action guy. He was the face of a new cinematic era. But Keanu himself remained unchanged. While Hollywood celebrated, he downplayed his own role. He credited the Wachowskis, the stunt team, and the crew. When he received his paycheck, tens of millions of dollars, he famously gave a large portion of it to the visual effects and costume teams, believing they were the true heroes behind the film's success. To him, it wasn't about wealth or status. It was about respect for the craft. The success of The Matrix launched sequels, The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions, both released in 2003. The scope expanded, the action grew grander, but with success came scrutiny. Critics debated whether the sequels matched the brilliance of the original, but Keanu remained committed. He once again trained for months, performing grueling fight scenes that pushed him to his limits. To him, the sequels were not about chasing box office numbers, but about honoring the story's continuation. Beyond the films themselves, The Matrix solidified Keanu as a global icon. His black trench coat, sunglasses, and stoic expression became instantly recognizable symbols. Fans across the world quoted his lines, "I know kung fu, and there is no spoon," with reverence. Yet fame, once again, sat lightly on his shoulders. While others might have reveled in the limelight, Keanu retreated into his familiar pattern: generosity, humility, and simplicity. He still rode the subway, still stopped to chat with fans, still gave away much of his earnings. At one point, he quietly arranged to gift Harley-Davidson motorcycles to the stunt team of The Matrix Reloaded, thanking them for their hard work and risk. Stories like these only deepen the mythos of the internet's favorite actor, a title he never sought but naturally embodied. But as the new millennium dawned, Keanu's life was not only defined by cinematic triumphs. In the shadows of success, personal tragedies struck. The joy of The Matrix's success was soon tempered by heartbreaks that would forever mark him. In 1999, the same year that Neo entered the cultural imagination, Keanu and his partner Jennifer Syme suffered the stillbirth of their daughter Ava. The loss devastated them. Less than 2 years later, Jennifer herself died in a tragic car accident. For Keanu, the pain was unimaginable. 2 losses so close together, wounds that could never fully heal. He carried the grief quietly, never seeking pity, never making it public fodder. But those close to him saw the weight in his eyes, the way he withdrew into himself. Acting became both a refuge and a responsibility, but off-screen he embraced solitude. Motorcycles, books, and the simple company of a few trusted friends became his sanctuary. And yet, even in pain, Keanu never hardened. He did not lash out at the world or become bitter. Instead, he chose kindness. Perhaps loss had taught him the fragility of life, or perhaps his gentle nature was always there, but he moved through the world with empathy. Strangers who encountered him often spoke of how present he was, how genuinely he listened. Fame had not eroded his humanity. It had, in some ways, deepened it. By the early 2000s, Keanu Reeves was both a global superstar and a quiet enigma. He had headlined one of the greatest films of all time, but still lived like an ordinary man. He had endured heartbreaks that might have broken others, yet he carried himself with humility and grace. The world saw him as Neo, the One. But in truth, Keanu was still searching for meaning, for peace, for a way to balance the extremes of his life. And though he could not know it, another reinvention still lay ahead. Years later, a new role, John Wick, would once again remind the world of his unique place in cinema. But first, he had to survive the silence after The Matrix, and the storms of his own private grief. For the public, the late 1990s and early 2000s were the years when Keanu Reeves became Neo, a cinematic messiah who bent reality and defied destiny. But behind the cameras, away from the applause, his personal life was unraveling in ways that no film could soften. Keanu had always been guarded about romance. Fame made privacy difficult, and his nature was shy, unpretentious. Yet in the mid-1990s, he found love in the form of Jennifer Syme, a production assistant and aspiring actress. Their connection was quiet and genuine. Unlike the glitzy relationships that often dominated tabloids, Keanu and Jennifer lived simply, enjoying one another's company away from the cameras. For a man who had carried so much loss already, she represented stability, warmth, and the promise of family. In 1999, they were expecting a child. For Keanu, who had long yearned for the bonds of family that had eluded him since childhood, it was a moment filled with hope. But tragedy struck with merciless cruelty. Their daughter, Ava Archer Syme-Reeves, was stillborn just weeks before her due date. The grief was crushing. For Keanu and Jennifer, the joy of becoming parents was replaced by silence, absence, and pain. The relationship, already strained under the weight of the loss, could not survive. They separated, though they remained close. Then, in April 2001, Jennifer Syme died in a car accident in Los Angeles. She was only 28. The news hit Keanu with devastating force. He had lost not only the woman he once loved, but also a piece of himself. Friends said he seemed hollow in the months that followed, carrying sorrow like a shadow that clung to him wherever he went. He rarely spoke about it publicly, but his silence spoke volumes. Keanu's grief was compounded by another painful truth. His sister Kim had been battling leukemia since the 1990s. While he juggled filming commitments, he spent long stretches caring for her, offering comfort and funding her treatments. He sold his home to move closer to her, prioritizing her health over his own career. For years, he lived with the possibility of losing her, watching helplessly as she fought for her life. His generosity extended beyond his family. He donated millions to hospitals and cancer research organizations, often anonymously, never seeking recognition. These losses and struggles shaped him profoundly. Unlike many celebrities who drowned their pain in excess, Keanu chose another path: solitude. He never remarried, never had more children. He was often seen alone, riding his motorcycle through Los Angeles, reading in cafes, or sitting quietly on park benches. The media sometimes mocked him as the sad Keanu, after a paparazzi photo captured him eating a sandwich alone on a bench. But what the world mistook for loneliness was something else: acceptance, reflection, resilience. Still, he never lost his kindness. Stories began to circulate, whispered at first, then spread widely. Keanu giving up his seat on crowded subways, Keanu chatting with homeless people, Keanu writing personal thank you notes to film crews. On the set of The Matrix, he had quietly given millions of his own salary to costume designers and visual effects teams, insisting they deserved it more. When he returned for sequels, he bought motorcycles for the stunt team, a gesture that cemented his reputation as one of the most generous actors in Hollywood. In interviews, he rarely discussed his tragedies. When asked, he would pause, smile faintly, and answer with simplicity: "Grief changes shape, but it never ends." He carried his pain with dignity, never exploiting it for sympathy, never using it as an excuse. Instead, he seemed to transform it into empathy. Those who met him, whether fans, colleagues, or strangers, often remarked on how present he was, how he truly listened. It was as if he knew, better than most, that every moment could be fleeting. Professionally, the early 2000s were uneven. After the Matrix sequels, Keanu experimented with a variety of roles: the supernatural noir Constantine, 2005, the romantic drama Sweet November, 2001, and Richard Linklater's animated A Scanner Darkly, 2006. Some films resonated, others faltered, but Keanu was never one to chase trends. He chose projects instinctively, sometimes puzzling studios who expected him to build a more conventional blockbuster resume. He also pursued music with his band, Dogstar, touring small venues where fans came not just for the songs but to see Keanu in his element, casual, approachable, blending into the group rather than standing above it. For him, music was not about fame. It was about expression, camaraderie, and joy. Through all of this, he maintained his unique approach to fame: live simply, give generously, avoid the noise. While his peers bought mansions in Beverly Hills, Keanu lived in modest homes or hotels. While others demanded entourages, he often drove himself to set on his motorcycle, helmet hiding his face. He never courted the tabloids, never tried to control his image. He simply lived. For a time, it seemed that Keanu Reeves had receded from the Hollywood spotlight. The industry, fickle as always, moved on to newer stars, but Keanu didn't mind. Fame had never been his goal. He worked when he found roles that mattered, rested when he needed space, and gave of himself quietly. Yet Hollywood has a way of circling back, and destiny was not done with him. Beneath the quiet years, a new chapter was waiting, one that would once again catapult him into global fame. In 2014, a small action film with a modest budget would arrive. No one could have predicted that it would ignite a new cultural phenomenon, redefine his career, and create yet another legendary character. That film was John Wick. By the early 2010s, Keanu Reeves was considered by some in Hollywood to be past his prime. He was respected, admired for his earlier successes, but the industry is unrelenting, always chasing the next star. To many executives, Keanu was a man whose biggest hits were behind him, whose career had peaked with The Matrix. He still acted, still worked, but he was no longer the centerpiece of blockbuster conversations. Then came John Wick. The project began as a modest action film directed by Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, both of whom had started as stunt coordinators and second unit directors. Stahelski had worked with Keanu years earlier as his stunt double in The Matrix. Their history gave the project an unusual intimacy. Stahelski knew not only Keanu's strengths as an actor, but also his discipline, his willingness to train harder than anyone else. The story was deceptively simple. A retired hitman mourning the death of his wife receives one final gift from her, a puppy named Daisy, a symbol of hope and healing. When intruders kill the dog and steal his car, John Wick returns to the violent underworld he had left behind, unleashing a storm of vengeance. On paper, it was another action flick in a crowded genre, but in Keanu's hands, John Wick became something different. Keanu trained for months, mastering judo, jiu-jitsu, and tactical gunplay. He spent endless hours at shooting ranges, practicing gun-fu choreography until his movements became second nature. Unlike many actors who relied heavily on stunt doubles, Keanu performed the majority of his own action sequences. The authenticity was undeniable. Every reload, every throw, every punch felt grounded in reality. But beyond the choreography, Keanu infused John Wick with something that surprised audiences: vulnerability. Beneath the assassin's cold precision was grief, loneliness, and love for a lost wife and a small dog. The role resonated with Keanu's own life experiences, loss, endurance, and the relentless search for meaning. When Wick's grief turned into fury, audiences believed it, not just because of the action, but because of the humanity Keanu brought to the character. Released in 2014, John Wick became an unexpected hit. It wasn't just a movie, it was the beginning of a phenomenon. Critics praised the balletic action sequences, the neon-soaked visuals, and the intricate underworld mythology. Fans celebrated Keanu's return to the spotlight, hailing him as the internet's favorite action hero. The film grossed over $80 million worldwide on a modest budget, but its cultural impact was far greater. Suddenly, Keanu was everywhere again. Memes, fan art, think pieces about his career. The internet crowned him the Baba Yaga, the boogeyman, but also something softer, the internet's wholesome king. Sequels followed quickly. John Wick, Chapter 2, 2017, expanded the universe, delving deeper into the secret society of assassins, the Continental Hotel, and the elaborate codes of honor. Keanu continued to train relentlessly, pushing his body to its limits, performing stunts that actors half his age might hesitate to attempt. By John Wick. Chapter 3, Parabellum, 2019. The franchise had exploded into a cultural juggernaut. The film earned over $320 million worldwide, solidifying Wick as one of the defining action heroes of the 21st century. Audiences couldn't get enough of the intricate choreography, the stylized violence, and the mythic aura surrounding Keanu's character. But the real story was Keanu himself. His career had been reborn, not through reinvention, but through authenticity. He wasn't trying to be anyone else. He was simply being Keanu, hardworking, disciplined, humble, and deeply human. His presence in John Wick didn't feel like a performance. It felt like destiny. The Keanussance, as fans called it, spread beyond the films. In 2019, he stole the show at E3, the massive video game expo, when he appeared on stage to promote Cyberpunk 2077. When a fan shouted, "You're breathtaking," Keanu immediately pointed back and replied, "You're breathtaking. You're all breathtaking." The moment went viral, encapsulating his unfiltered kindness and humility. That same year, he voiced Duke Kaboom in Pixar's Toy Story 4, playing a lovable Canadian stuntman toy, a nod to both his heritage and his motorcycle obsession. Even in a supporting role, Keanu's energy shone through, bringing warmth and humor to the film. He also appeared in comedies. including a memorable self-parody in Always Be My Maybe, 2019, where he played an exaggerated version of himself, pretentious, dramatic, yet hilariously self-aware. It was proof that Keanu didn't take himself too seriously, even as the world was rediscovering him as an icon. The renewed fame didn't change him. He continued to live modestly, riding the subway, supporting charities, and giving generously without fanfare. When asked why he didn't live like other A-list celebrities, he shrugged. "Money doesn't mean anything to me. I've made a lot of money, but I want to enjoy life and not stress about building my bank account." For Keanu, the John Wick resurgence wasn't about reclaiming stardom. It was about the work, the craft, and the connection with audiences. He had weathered decades of highs and lows, tragedies and triumphs, and emerged with a rare kind of wisdom. Fans didn't just love John Wick, they loved Keanu Reeves, the man who embodied resilience, kindness, and authenticity in an industry often defined by ego and artifice. As the 2020s began, John Wick Chapter 4 was in development, and spin-offs were announced, cementing the franchise as a cinematic universe. For Keanu, now in his late 50s, it was proof that age was irrelevant when talent, dedication, and heart were timeless. Yet even as the franchise grew, Keanu remained the same man who had once slept on couches, played bass in dive bars, and grieved silently for loved ones lost. Fame had found him again, but he never went looking for it. His greatest role, perhaps, was not Neo or John Wick, but simply being himself, a man who survived pain without bitterness, who gave without expectation, who lived without pretense. In the story of Hollywood, where stars rise and fall like passing comets, Keanu Reeves had become something rare, not just a movie star, but a symbol of endurance, humility, and hope. And with John Wick, he reminded the world of what he had always been: an actor, a fighter, and above all, a human being. By the dawn of the 2020s, Keanu Reeves had transcended the traditional arc of a Hollywood career. He was no longer simply a movie star, nor even just an action icon. He had become a cultural figure, a living parable of resilience and humility in an industry often driven by ego. The Keanussance had shifted him from cult admiration to global adoration, and yet, as always, Keanu wore it lightly. The new decade brought new milestones. In 2021, The Matrix Resurrections debuted, bringing Neo back to the screen after nearly 2 decades. For Keanu, it was more than a sequel. It was a homecoming. Reuniting with Carrie-Anne Moss, he slipped back into the role that had defined an era, this time portraying an older, wearier Neo caught between memory and reality. Critics were divided on the film's execution, but almost all agreed Keanu himself was magnetic. His performance carried the weight of lived experience, lending Neo an emotional depth that paralleled Keanu's own journey of survival and acceptance. At the same time, John Wick Chapter 4 was in production. Anticipation reached a fever pitch. Fans who had followed Keanu from Bill and Ted to The Matrix to John Wick saw in him not just an actor but a touchstone for decades of cinema. In interviews, Keanu spoke with his usual humility, crediting the stunt teams, directors, and crew for his success. He always redirected praise outward, never hoarding it for himself. Yet beyond the screen, Keanu's quiet philosophy continued to shine through. He often reflected on mortality, grief, and the fleeting nature of life, subjects shaped by his personal losses. In one interview, when asked about what happens after death, he paused for a long moment before answering, "I know that the ones who love us will miss us." The simplicity of the reply struck a chord with millions. It wasn't a philosophical lecture or a religious doctrine. It was raw humanity, expressed with grace. He continued to give generously. Though he rarely advertised his philanthropy, reports surfaced of his ongoing support for children's hospitals, cancer research, and struggling artists. He had founded a private charitable foundation years earlier, deliberately keeping his name out of it. To Keanu, generosity was not a performance. It was a responsibility. Professionally, the 2020s further expanded his reach. He reprised his role as Ted in Bill and Ted Face the Music, 2020, a lighthearted return to the characters that had started his journey. He appeared in indie projects, lent his voice to animated features, and collaborated on video games like Cyberpunk 2077. Each endeavor revealed his eclectic tastes, his refusal to be boxed into one genre or archetype. But perhaps his greatest role in this era was as himself, the man fans encountered on sidewalks, in bookstores, or at airports. Viral stories poured in. Keanu helping a stranded fellow traveler after a plane emergency landing, chatting warmly with fans who approached him at restaurants, signing autographs for hours without complaint. Unlike many celebrities who insulated themselves with bodyguards and barriers, Keanu moved through the world with openness. He seemed to understand that fame was fleeting, but kindness was eternal. Social media magnified his image as the internet's boyfriend, the rare celebrity who embodied authenticity in a digital age saturated with curated perfection. Photos of him walking alone, riding the subway, or simply smiling with strangers became emblems of something larger, a longing for decency in a world often marked by cynicism. In his personal life, whispers of romance finally returned, though in a quieter, more grounded form. His relationship with artist Alexandra Grant became public, sparking widespread admiration. Fans celebrated the pairing not for its glamour but for its maturity. Here was Keanu, after decades of solitude, finding companionship in someone who shared his creativity and values. Their relationship seemed to embody balance, respect, and genuine affection, qualities Keanu had always cherished more than spectacle. As John Wick, Chapter 4, prepared to release in 2023, Keanu faced the demanding physical challenges of the role with his usual discipline. Despite being nearly 60, he trained rigorously, performing grueling action sequences that left younger actors in awe. His body carried scars, his joints ached, but his spirit remained unbroken. In interviews, when asked why he pushed himself so hard, he smiled, "I love the work. I love what we create together." For fans, that sentiment captured his essence. Keanu Reeves was never about celebrity. He was about the work, the people, the shared act of storytelling. Fame had come and gone, but his love for the craft remained constant. Looking at his legacy in the 2020s, it was clear Keanu represented more than just iconic roles. He represented endurance. He had faced abandonment, loss, grief, and obscurity, yet emerged without bitterness. He gave without expectation, worked without arrogance, and lived without excess. Hollywood is filled with dazzling stars that burn brightly and fade quickly. Keanu Reeves became something rarer, a steady light, guiding quietly, warming those who encountered him. His career was not just a story of movies. It was a story of a man who chose kindness when the world gave him every reason to be hardened. As the decade unfolded, fans and critics alike began to speak of Keanu not just as an actor, but as a cultural touchstone, a reminder that greatness is not measured only by awards or box office numbers, but by how one treats others along the way. And for Keanu Reeves, the story was still being written. Each new role, each unexpected appearance, each act of generosity added another chapter to a life defined not by the spotlight, but by the quiet power of grace. The boy who once struggled with dyslexia, who felt like an outsider in school, who faced loss after loss, had become a symbol of endurance. The man who played Neo in John Wick was more than a hero on screen. He was proof that resilience and kindness could outlast tragedy, that authenticity could outshine cynicism, and that even in the fleeting world of Hollywood, some stars never fade. As Keanu Reeves moved deeper into the 2020s, he had become more than the sum of his filmography. To millions around the globe, he symbolized something rare, a kind of authenticity that transcended Hollywood glamour. His story wasn't just about cinematic triumphs, but about surviving hardship with grace and meeting life's sorrows with dignity. In the realm of cinema, his contributions were undeniable. Neo from The Matrix had changed the very language of science fiction, redefining how action films could blend philosophy, spectacle, and emotional depth. John Wick had revolutionized action choreography, setting a new gold standard for intensity and precision. Characters like Ted Logan, Jack Traven, Johnny Utah, and Constantine had become part of pop culture's fabric, each carried by Keanu's unique blend of vulnerability and strength. But perhaps the deeper legacy was not in his roles, but in how he lived between them. After the roaring success of The Matrix, Keanu's choices puzzled Hollywood insiders. He turned down roles that would have guaranteed box office success. Instead, he sought projects that spoke to him artistically, even if they seemed unconventional. In The Gift, 2000, he played against type as an abusive husband, showing audiences a darker side of his range. In Sweet November, 2001, he starred in a romantic drama that revealed his gentler, vulnerable presence. He continued to experiment with different genres. The supernatural thriller Constantine, 2005, the animated A Scanner Darkly, 2006, and the time-bending romance The Lake House, 2006. Some films flopped. Others found cult followings, but Keanu's commitment to exploration was clear. He was not chasing money or fame. He was chasing meaning. Outside of acting, Keanu also pursued music. For much of the 1990s and early 2000s, he played bass guitar for the alternative rock band Dogstar. They toured modestly, and though critics never placed them among great bands, the experience allowed Keanu another form of expression, away from cameras, immersed in rhythm and sound. These were years of reflection, of drifting between projects, of keeping a low profile. The media sometimes portrayed him as fading, past his prime, but Keanu was patient. He was never in a rush to prove himself. Then in 2014, everything changed. A modest action film with a strange premise, John Wick, entered Keanu's life. Directed by Chad Stahelski, a former stuntman who had worked with Keanu on The Matrix, the film told the story of a retired assassin who embarks on a rampage after his beloved dog is killed. At first glance, it sounded simple, even absurd. But for Keanu, it was personal. The grief of John Wick mirrored his own: loss, anger, a desperate attempt to find purpose. He threw himself into the role, training tirelessly in gun fu, martial arts, and stunt choreography. At nearly 50, he performed most of his own stunts, astonishing younger co-stars with his discipline. The film was a sleeper hit. Audiences connected not only to the action, but to Keanu's quiet, haunted performance. John Wick wasn't just an assassin. He was a man wounded by loss, searching for meaning. Keanu's authenticity elevated the role into something iconic. Sequels followed: John Wick, Chapter 2, 2017, Chapter 3, Parabellum 2019, and Chapter 4, 2023. Each installment expanded the mythos, redefined modern action filmmaking, and cemented Keanu as one of the greatest action stars of his generation. The resurgence of his career was dubbed the Keanussance. Memes flooded the internet. Keanu is the internet's boyfriend. Clips of him giving up his subway seat, speaking humbly in interviews, or walking alone with quiet dignity went viral. In a culture obsessed with excess, Keanu's humility felt revolutionary. Beyond the screen, Keanu Reeves became known for something far rarer than stunts or blockbusters: kindness. Stories surfaced of him giving away most of his Matrix earnings to visual effects and costume crews, insisting they were the real magicians of the films. Colleagues told of his generosity on set, delivering coffee to the crew, celebrating birthdays with personalized gifts, taking pay cuts so other actors could be cast. Fans encountered him on the street and described the same pattern. He listened. He smiled. He gave his time. He once sat on a New York park bench with a homeless man, sharing food and conversation for hours unnoticed. He was photographed riding the subway, offering his seat to a stranger, unaware he was being filmed. When asked about death in an interview, he paused thoughtfully and said, "I know that the ones who love us will miss us." It was simple, profound, and undeniably Keanu. In the 2020s, Keanu remained as relevant as ever. He reprised his role as Ted in Bill and Ted Face the Music in 2020, a nostalgic journey for fans who grew up with the characters. He returned as Neo in The Matrix Resurrections, 2021, a reflective continuation of the franchise. Outside of film, he co-created BRZRKR, a comic series that echoed his fascination with immortality, violence, and meaning. It quickly became a bestseller, expanding his creative reach beyond acting. In his personal life, he found companionship with artist Alexandra Grant. Their relationship, based on shared values and creativity, delighted fans who admired its authenticity. For once, Keanu's love life wasn't hidden in tragedy, but in quiet joy. And still, he remained the same. Modest, private, unchanged by decades of fame. Keanu Reeves' journey is unlike most in Hollywood. He has faced abandonment, dyslexia, devastating loss, and endless scrutiny. He has risen, fallen, and risen again. Yet through it all, he has never lost his kindness. His legacy is not only Neo, John Wick, or Ted Logan. It is the quiet moments, the smile to a stranger, the care for his sister, the generosity to crews, the humility in every success. Fame for Keanu was never the destination. Life, with all its beauty and sorrow, was. And so the cool breeze over the mountains continues. Gentle, steady, unforgettable.